Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wild Wild Podcast. I, I think I've almost accidentally got into the habit now of just saying names of films instead of the name of the podcast. So I nearly called this War of the Podcast. And maybe that could also work. But anyway, welcome to Wild Wild Podcast. My name is Adrian. I'm here with my very patient co-host, Rod.
Oh, I don't have that much patience, and it's not much of it is required. Trust.
Now, your other podcast, one of your other podcasts, The Bloody Pit, you just did an episode on American Rickshaw, a Sergio Martino film, which is one I haven't seen yet, but it's definitely on my radar. But I was pleased to see you were tackling another cult film that I'm not entirely sure if we were going to do a movie like that, what category we would put it in.
Oh my goodness. Well, American Rickshaw, what category would I put that film in? It's so crazed because it ends up being something that you could never guess from the first, 30 minutes. It's an amalgam of what if it turns into what if you did Big Trouble in Little China with very little money.
Okay. I did wonder from what you were saying that sounded like the kind of closest comparison.
Yeah. It's a bizarre film. It's an amalgam of various elements that really shouldn't fit together, and yet by the end they kind of sort of weirdly enough do. It's from the late 80s. It's from 89, and I have a tendency, and I talk about it in the podcast, I've had a prejudice against the late 80s, early 90s kind of tail end of the golden age of the European exploitation period. I've had a prejudice against that, post 85 or so group of films in general because honestly I think it was just easy to be that way because there were so many fewer chances to enjoy yourself. I mean, they just made fewer and fewer films past a certain point. They just felt, they couldn't compete. They couldn't get the money together. A lot of movies just didn't get made that possibly filmmakers wanted to make. And so there are fewer of them. And once you start hitting on some films from that period that are, shall we say, less than awesome, you start to realize, okay, not only do they look and feel different, they're just of a lower quality. And so you kind of tend to back, or at least I tended to back away from them. But here lately, I've actually started to stumble across a bunch of them. With American Rickshaw, it was because Cauldron, this new boutique video company, put it out on Blu-ray, and so I realized, okay, Sergio Martino, let me give it a shot. He's really pretty much never let me down in the past, so let me check out this late 80s film from him, and you know what? Thoroughly enjoyed it. It's insane. If you want to see Donald Pleasance morph into a pig beast, this is your movie. So.
That man will appear in anything,
especially during the late 80s and early 90s. Yeah, I mean, it was just like it's like he realized, I should just lean into this. So.
Yeah. After doing Halloween, which really kind of raised his profile, he realized he could just pop up in anything and make a quick buck.
I think it may have actually been around the time of Halloween 4 when he realizes, oh, they're going to find a way to put me in these things no matter what happens. So, I think that may have been what kicked the door open. I would love for someone who maybe has some insight into Donald Pleasance's mindset during the 80s about what he decided to do and what he decided not to do. And why he suddenly just decided, I'm just going to take every job in the world,
Yeah. I love Donald Pleasance. He always raises the quality of anything he appears in.
Agreed. And American Rickshaw is no exception. So
I don't know if anyone's ever done a book actually on Donald Pleasance.
Oh, I don't know either.
Speaking of which, I was thinking, and I haven't listened to the whole episode yet, but when you were talking about American Rickshaw, I thought an interesting book theme would be the Italian movies made in America in the 80s, because you think obviously the classic Troll 2 is one of these, and that can easily be forgotten as being an Italian movie, but that is
shot in Utah.
And then you got the more classy stuff like Nightmare Beach, But even, I mean, I don't even know. Obviously, the 80s was the key period for all that. But even
Hmm.
into the 70s, you've got stuff like The Visitor, which I think was 78.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, because I always think of the first one that I'm aware of being Fulci's The Beyond,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
where that one was clearly shot in Louisiana. All the exteriors were shot
Yeah,
in Louisiana, and
that's
the
true.
interiors
And
were shot
he,
back in Italy. So
maybe he was one of the first because he obviously used New York a little bit in Zombie Flesh Eaters.
and New York Ripper.
Um, and obviously New York Ripper. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of The Visitor, which I think was Atlanta. But anyway, there's definitely for some enterprising writer who's got nothing to do
Who's
to
looking
pick
for
that
a
up as a
project?
theme. Yeah, why not? American Italian films, I think would be interesting. But speaking of books, it was my birthday a few days ago, and my wife surprised me with the first volume of Troy Howarth's Jallow series.
Oh yeah.
So that's really cool. So I've been looking through that and realizing how many of them I already own but haven't watched yet, just sitting in the cupboard, as well as how many I'd never heard of. So that's really interesting. But also, the book stops in 1973, so eventually I will have to get the second volume because there's a lot more still to come.
Cool. Yeah. Strangely enough, I only have the third volume. I still haven't picked up the
Oh,
first two. It's
there we
I,
go.
I can't remember exactly how I ended up being able to get volume three. I mean, I normally I don't buy things like that out of sequence, but uh,
Mm.
I'm crazy.
Yeah, and yeah. Anyway, but that's quite good. So that's my sort of Italian themed gift. I was very pleased with that. But as I've said before, we're not. I'm not intending at the moment to cover the Giallo purely because there are so many other Italian films that we can talk about on this podcast.
Very true.
Which, speaking of which, I have some other news which I did tweet the other day. The Film Detective have done a restoration of Antonio Margheriti's Battle of the Worlds, which is a film that we did discuss way back in episode 2 or 3, but we didn't actually do it
No, no.
because otherwise this might have just turned into the Margheriti podcast season, which I know is no bad thing, but yeah. So and we talked about it. You've covered it on your podcast before, and it's possibly, from what you've said, one of the more boring of the Margheriti space
Well,
films.
it's more interesting. Don't get me wrong. It's the one with Claude Rains, and therefore
Yeah.
I consider it to be a pretty good movie.
Right.
And the fact that there's been a restoration done on it is good. That means that's good. I'm hoping that means that they'll bring it out on Blu-ray eventually
Yeah.
if the elements are of such quality, because what they restored it for is just for their streaming channel right now. And I'm guessing they may be. I guess there's probably two things going through the businessman's head there at Film Detective, which is what's the reaction when we put this up on the streaming channel? In other words, how many people stream it, and then also are the elements of high enough quality that doing an HD release hard copy would actually be a good idea, or would it
Yeah.
not look as good as we wish it would? So
I assume that the reason they've gone for this one is partly, I mean, I think the Film Detective seem to mostly specialize in public domain stuff, if I've understood that correctly.
I'm not sure. I know this. I have their streaming service
Oh, right.
because I picked up like their first Blu-ray release, and one of the things they gave you as part of that package was a free year of their streaming service, and a lot of the stuff
Oh,
on there is
nice.
just public domain stuff to a large degree, but they are constantly adding a bunch of different weird things to it,
Okay.
including odd television series, which from the like 50s, which, man, you can find some. Let's just say it's a minefield with gopher holes in it. You just never know what you're going to find. But the strange thing about Film Detective is I don't know if it's all going to be public domain stuff. I don't think that's true. I mean, they just did Flight to Mars. They
Oh,
just
okay.
they just did the first one that I picked up was a Giant of the Unknown, which I don't
Right.
think ever fell into public domain. So I think there's
Okay.
definitely some
Interesting.
licensing going on with some of this stuff. So it's I have no specific insight into how they're handling their video releases, but if they can get Battle of the Worlds out on Blu-ray, I will be a happy purchaser.
Yeah. I assume that they went with this one because of the Claude Rains name would help with the marketing.
Probably.
But if you're so actually at the date that we're recording this, which is the 30th of July, the film is debuting on their channel today at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Hmm.
I don't know what that means, but I guess that's like later today for you.
It's that time where I live. Yes.
Yeah, so that's quite exciting. So yeah, but it'll be interesting to see what they do with that and how they go about making that more readily available. I'd also like to know more of the story about how they've done the restoration, because previously it was only ever available in sort of faded prints.
Yeah.
So where they've gone, how they've done it, I don't know anything. They've done a blog on, which is what I tweeted out. There's a blog post about it, but the blog is more broadly about Margheriti's science fiction rather than here's how we did the restoration. But anyway, it's good that that the stuff like this is getting out there and more people will perhaps be discovering Margheriti's sci-fi work for the first time, which is quite cool. But anyway, we need to get to our movie for today.
Oh, must we?
We must, and I think this film is directly inspired by Antonio Margheriti's Gamma One quadrilogy.
Yeah.
We are talking about a film with a few different names. On some, it's called Cosmos, War of the Planets. Elsewhere, I've seen it just called War of the Planets. In Italian, it's Anno Zero, Guerra, nello spazio, which basically means year zero, war in space. I think hopefully I've got that right this time. I keep
think
cocking
so,
it
yeah.
up cocking it up every week we do. So Alfonso Brescia,
Yes.
what is your experience of this director? Because he's actually very prolific. When I looked him up, there's a couple of films that he's known for, particularly Beast in Space, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But he had a very long career going back into the Peplum films,
Right.
as a writer, as a director. He's done all kinds of fun stuff. What's your experience with him?
In general, when I think of Alfonso Brescia, as soon as I see his name, I just immediately flinch because I'm anticipating pain. The the fact of the matter is that once you look at the totality of his career, I shouldn't have that visceral reaction. But early in the video age, anybody who was seeking out science fiction films that you hadn't seen before were going to stumble across budget releases of this film and War of the Robots and Star Odyssey, basically all these different science fiction films that he made back to back to back in the late 70s. I wonder why. What could have prompted the sudden desire to do a bunch of cheap science fiction? I can't imagine. Anyway,
Not sure.
yeah, it's a mystery to no one knows. These things just pop up.
It's funny it's funny you should say that, because obviously we've done a bit of a jump here, because last time we were here we were talking about one of the Gamma One films, and now we've jumped forwards about 10, just a bit more than 10 years.
Yeah.
Because basically after Margheriti did his films, Italy seemed to stop making films set in space. There are other sci-fi movies, and we might come back and do some of those another time, but because this season I wanted to specifically focus on the space movies, and there really weren't any. After Bava did his one and Margheriti did his 4, nobody else really went to space in Italian cinema until a certain significant event occurred in America that suddenly got everybody thinking about space movies again. And
yes. Some mysterious event.
Alfonso Brescia, or Al Bradley as he's sometimes known, was straight in there with not one film, not 2 films, not even 3 films, but 5 films.
Yes,
in a
yes.
period of about 2 or 3 years.
And it's let's just say it shows.
Hmm.
When you
But
produce these kinds of movies on that time, that kind of a timeline, you're going to end up with, shall we say, a spotty record of quality.
yeah, but so were you familiar with any of his Peplum movies or his westerns? Or, I mean, he's done Giallo. He's done all kinds of stuff.
I wasn't initially, but over the years, I've seen a few more of his movies, and I have to say, um, the
They're all
science
crap.
fiction movies are not a no. That's definitely not true.
Oh, good.
I can admit to the fact that I did see years and years ago the Magnificent Gladiator from I think like '64, and pretty good little movie. He has a screenwriter credit and a director's credit on that.
Mm.
I'm curious to see Conqueror of Atlantis because I can't be sure from the description and the images I've seen whether I've seen it or not because for some reason all Peplum movies have a tendency to have similar images. It's
Oh,
strange, I
yes.
know, it's
I
very
know.
odd, but I can't say that I've definitely seen like one the any of the westerns or Eurospy movies that he made, but I will say that I am a bizarre defender of one of his. Well, I'm not even going to say that. I am a flat out defender of a giallo he made in the '70s that I think is
Let me guess. Let me guess. Is it Naked Girl Murdered in the Park?
yes, and I think that I
What a
kind of
title.
well, exactly, and that is that's a newspaper headline in the film
Yeah.
that they use to great effect. Of course, is the title
Uh,
and the
it's also the plot line of a lot of films.
yes, it's like if you basically the what's on the tin had better
Yeah.
damn well be in the
Yeah.
packaging, right?
No,
Uh,
yeah. So I haven't seen that one, but the name rings a bell. Did it get a release
yes,
relatively recently on Blu-ray?
yes, it
Is
just
that
came
why?
out a few months ago. They had to do a they had to repress it because it was done by Full Moon, and if Full Moon
Oh,
can't screw something up, then they just aren't breathing. So
oh, it's a
the
full moon release. That's
yeah, yeah.
why.
Well,
Okay,
they're
that's probably
absolutely
why I.
the terrible
Yeah.
thing is there are absolutely no extras on it. Now, if you buy it now, you're going to get a good Blu-ray, but it's just the movie. But the
Right.
movie is, I mean, it looks fantastic. It
Okay.
looks beautiful, and the reason they had to repress it is that they totally screwed up the audio on it because,
Wow.
like I say, they're Full Moon, and the audio sounded like it was coming out of I don't know out of a barrel or something. They had not I don't know how they screwed it up, but they did.
Yeah.
So the they repressed it, and I can highly recommend that movie. I think that is actually really entertaining, a little slightly sleazy giallo from the
Okay.
mid '70s, and I do
Slightly,
like it.
slightly sleazy.
Oh, there are sleazier than that film. Trust
Yeah,
me.
well, that's true. I'm
I
sure
mean,
it's
man.
no Giallo in Venice. I'm sure.
Well, yeah, and I wasn't even thinking down that path, but yeah,
Um,
almost anything judged
yeah.
against against that particular movie. But I also
He
have a lot of affection for a later movie that he made that I honestly probably stand on an island in praise of this one. But he did what is generally referred to as Iron Warrior, which is it's often thought of as like the third Ator film.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, if you go into Iron Warrior thinking that it's going to be, similar in style and structure to the first two Ator movies, whether you like them or not, you're gonna think that somebody dropped some acid into your tea. But
Mm.
the thing that I realize that I love about Iron Warrior is that it completely dispenses with all of the connective tissue between the plot points. And because it's a fantasy film, they use that as the reason for just plopping the character down where he needs to be for the next thing for the next little bead on the
Right.
string telling the story. And I find
Okay.
it kind of amazing that they just kind of leaned into the fact that that's all they could manage.
Right.
And
That's
it's
cool. I mean, I haven't seen. I've seen the first Ator film.
mhm.
I mean, it's kind of interesting that Alfonso Brescia is coming in to pick up where Joe D'Amato left off. Like these are two
Yes.
guys who people might think of in kind of similar ways in terms of cinematic quality. But I, if you've got Alfonso Brescia stepping in because Joe D'Amato couldn't be bothered anymore, then your expectations are probably going to be pretty low, I would imagine. But,
Yes, as they
that's
should
interesting. Interesting. I mean, it's still got Miles O'Keefe, and as long as you've got him, then you've got Ator.
be. At least you've got plenty of O'Keefe. Yeah.
I did actually. I was on the B movie cast about a year or so ago talking about Ator. I think that first film is hilarious.
Oh, I really enjoy the first one. I get a kick out of the second one, and I as I've expressed, the third one is I consider nothing a guilty pleasure, but I will say this: I know I will have to defend it every time I bring it up. So
yeah, so Alfonso Brescia, I think he's definitely a director we'll come back to again and again in the podcast, because he also did Polizioteschi films, a couple of which are quite popular, I think. He's a director who definitely would ride on popular trends. So in the 70s he was doing sex comedies. He did a kind of masked men film, Super Stooges versus the Wonder Women, which I think is perhaps one of the best titles on his CV. But so we're looking this time at his... Now, as far as I can tell, the whole overall thing doesn't have a name. Like, so Margheriti had the Gamma 1 quadrilogy.
right.
These, perhaps because they're not very good, they've not really been given a collective grouping. So we've just got... So there are 5 films. Well, I mean, I don't know, 4 or 5, depending on how you want to count them. So there's War of the Planets, which is our film today. And these titles are so confusing because this is where they further get mixed up, I think, with the Gamma 1 films. War of the Planets. Then he did Battle of the Stars.
Right. Not Battle of the Network Stars. That was something completely different. So
War of the Robots.
Right.
And then Star Odyssey, which is a great name. And then he came back a year later and thought, I've still got these costumes. How can I reuse these but also make a porno? Aha! And so he made because
Beast in Space is... Have you seen it?
Not yet, but it's on our list.
Man, it's an experience.
Yeah, I mean that one seems to be... We'll talk about it when we get to it, because basically Serpa Lane was available, and they thought, well, people only know her from The Beast, so let's just do that again. And he said, oh, but I've got these costumes and these helmets, and like, we've got space, we've got the Beast. How are we going to combine these two things together in a way that makes sense? Oh, wow.
They gave up on that. They gave up on that last part there, I'm going to tell you now.
But so kind of really there are only 4 films, and then Beast in Space is kind of tagged on at the end because they're all wearing the same costumes. But I would argue that one's probably not canon, whereas these 4 all appear to be all a bit like the Gamma 1 thing. They all kind of are occurring within the same bit of galaxy.
The same confusing universe, yes.
Yeah. So now I was thinking about this after I watched it. I don't really know how to talk about this movie.
Okay.
Because I don't know about you, but I was thoroughly confused by it. It felt...
Yeah, of course you're confused. The movie makes almost no coherent linear sense.
So we talked about, when we did our Gamma 1 film, Wild Wild Planet, we talked about the fact that they sort of shot those 4 films very closely together, possibly sometimes even shooting 2 at a time.
Right.
And there was this rumour how they used coloured clapperboards to make sure that the footage was for the right film. What this film feels like is that they forgot to do that, and that they just shot 4 movies at the same time and then gave all the footage to somebody else to edit them without giving him any clue as to which bits went in which film. Because stuff just happens in this movie. You're like, what? Hang on, what? All the time stuff will happen, and then suddenly you're in a room with some other people and you're like, what are they just talking about? And then you go over to somewhere else, something else happens, and there's nothing connecting the 2 things you've just seen together, and it's really confusing.
I am of the belief, and I'm willing to be proven wrong, I am of the belief that there were not actual on paper scripts for these movies. Okay?
Yeah, that's
I am
possible.
of the belief that there were written on, post-it note sized bits of paper, possibly fished out of a garbage can, ideas that they decided they were going to build sequences around, and then later on figure out how these sequences actually fit together. Now, like I say, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but if I view these movies, especially this movie, if I view this movie in that way, then at least I don't feel as if I don't feel quite so cheated, and it also keeps my brain invested enough that I don't doze off, because that is the general consensus from just about anybody who's ever sat through an Al Bradley science fiction spectacular. If you are in need of a cure for insomnia, this will do it.
Well,
Because
Matt Blake calls the chapter about these films in his book Star Bores,
yeah,
and he's hit the nail on the head there, hasn't he?
it is.
But
As you were saying, man, they're so confusing.
yeah, see, I don't know if I would say boring necessarily. They're not good, and I've heard other people talk about Alfonso Brescia being the Italian Ed Wood. But again, I'm not sure I would agree with that, because Ed Wood's films are generally very entertaining.
Right.
And this one, I wasn't so much bored as just confused. But anyway, there is a plot summary. Matt Blake has attempted to describe the plot of this film.
Yes.
Which, good on him as far as I'm concerned, because I couldn't figure it out. But let's talk briefly about the casting first. Now, as far as I can tell, the first 4 films are the ones that are kind of together, do share similar cast members, but I must confess I haven't watched any of the other ones. I'm kind of tempted to after watching this one, but I don't know.
Fight that temptation.
So our main star here is John Richardson, which is really interesting because he's a British actor. He actually only just died earlier this year. There's an interview with him from a couple of years ago. The photographer Mark Morstan for Cinema Retro tracked John Richardson down, and John Richardson hasn't done interviews for years and years and years, but because John Richardson became a photographer after he retired from acting, he agreed to be interviewed by Mark Morstan, but they didn't really talk much about these films. I think possibly because John Richardson knows how terrible they were, but so it's really interesting that he ended up in these. Again, we're sort of past the period when these guys were going to Italy in huge numbers to make films. Like just last night, actually, I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood again, and obviously there's the whole sequence in there where he goes off to Italy and shoots 4 movies back to back. John Richardson, he did do some stuff. Obviously, he's in Black Sunday or The Mask of Satan.
So he worked with Bava.
He's perhaps best known for the Hammer films She and 1 Million Years BC.
Right.
And on that film is where he met Martina Beswick. They were kind of an item for quite a long time. Then, of course, he went back to Italy a bit later to do Torso,
right,
and Eyeball, both very classy movies.
Well, Frankenstein,
Frankenstein 80.
Frankenstein 80. If you want to, you should probably group that in with, if you're talking the classy nature of film, then Frankenstein 80 definitely fits that. Yeah.
I must admit I haven't seen that one, but it's got a great poster.
It's worth seeing at least one time. I got to tell you.
So John Richardson, but for him to just felt really bizarre to me of all the things for him to turn up in a very poor second-rate sci-fi movie. I mean, but I don't know. He obviously just did things for the money. I mean, a couple of years after this, he's appearing in Murder Obsession with Ricardo Freda. So he's just not that bothered, I guess.
Well, and then after that, I mean, really, after the late 70s flash, the first couple of years of the 80s, he's really not doing much of anything. I mean, it's almost like they're pulling him out of retirement to do the piece that he did for Dario Argento's production, The Church, back in '89. I mean, it's almost like he's just doing something different by then. Yeah.
Well, I think he did become a photographer. I think was his main other career. But anyway, it just sort of struck me as being a little bit odd to find him in this movie. But good for him. If it paid his bills, then why not? I suppose.
Precisely. And he seems to be having. I hate to put it in such crass terms. He seems to be having a good time while he's on screen in these films. So I'm guessing they're treating him well.
And his leading lady is Yanti Summer, a name that I was not familiar with at all. Did you know anything about her?
I knew next to nothing. The fact that she was only in a handful of movies, and a couple of TV miniseries appearances there in the 70s.
Yeah, she did one of the Trinity films. Well, I think maybe her casting came about. This is a bit of a stretch, but she was in Lucio Fulci's The Return of White Fang, and then Alfonso Brescia did the following White Fang film. Yeah. So maybe he'd been watching the White Fang movies to see what he was going to be ripping off, and spotted her and thought, oh, I'll make a note of her and use her in a future film. And then a couple of years later, he gave her a call. I mean, but her character, I don't know. I wouldn't even call them characters. They're like so badly written.
Yeah, they're just character sketches primarily. Yeah.
She doesn't really have much to do at all. The dialogue is hilarious. I'm going to put in just some random extracts of dialogue from the movie into the podcast, because they're speaking, it's almost like they're speaking stage directions at times. The dialogue is just awful.
Why in the hell did you send only one man out there?
Well, I thought, Captain,
Come in, Peter. Peter, can you hear me?
Very well, Captain.
It's too hazardous to work alone. Re-enter the ship immediately. We'll prepare another crew member to go with you. The orders are
that outside we work in pairs. Don't worry, Captain. I'll be extremely careful.
Captain, look at screen number 2.
Stop it, Segura. That's an order. If that battery breaks, the acid will destroy your spacesuit.
I know what I'm doing, Captain. It'll only take a few seconds.
He could die out there. He's liable to be...
It won't take long at all, Captain. I've got to screw this in. It won't take a moment.
Peter. You're a damn fool.
The acid! The acid's eating through my suit!
You've got plenty of time to get back to the ship. Use the directional. And above all, stay calm.
And it was clearly written to be spoken in English. Like John Richardson's lips are in sync with his dialogue. They were filming this as though it was for a British audience, but I don't know. I've not been able to find any evidence that the film got released anywhere outside of Italy in the 1970s.
I don't know. Yeah,
it didn't come. There's no normally if a film gets released commercially in America, it will have had a review in Variety, and it didn't get one. If it gets a commercial release in the UK, it will be reviewed in Monthly Film Bulletin. So, and there's nothing there. It didn't even come up on. It didn't even get a certificate from the British, from the the BBFC. So the only thing I can find, weirdly, it does crop up on a BBFC list in 1983. Possibly, maybe it was submitted as a VHS then, but it wasn't compulsory for films to have certificates on video in those days. So that might be why it doesn't show up as getting a certificate. So it's possible that it got some kind of weird little early home video release in the 80s in the UK. But as far as I can tell, it only got reviewed on release in Italy in the kind of Christmas period, 1977. So it would have been dubbed back into Italian anyway, presumably.
True.
So the whole English thing seemed a bit pointless. But it obviously survived. It's obviously the English language track survived long enough for it to eventually get out into the world on DVD and various online sources. Oh, I also, according to the BFI, a couple of extra titles that the film had. It had a working title of Cosmo 2000 Invasion of the Extra Bodies. Which
Okay.
doesn't make any sense at all either.
No, it doesn't.
So, yeah, I think we've probably
Look, I came up
teased.
with a great title for this movie,
Go on.
and it fits everything that happens in the. How about
Okay.
War of the Robot Overlord?
Yeah, well, that does make more sense, and he basically seems like an angry. What was that robot from Lost in Space?
Oh, the B9 robot, yeah.
Yeah, he just kind of feels. I just kept waiting for him to say "Danger, Will Robinson" at any
Precisely.
point. So here we go. Plot summary. This is going to be short. This will be the shortest plot summary of our whole podcast career so far.
Okay.
War of the Planets follows Captain Alex Hamilton, John Richardson. Now that reminded me already. You were saying something in one of your podcasts about when they give people names
Oh,
and they're
yes.
trying to make them sound like they're American or English, and they just come up with really boring names.
Oh, they come
or
up with
names
such generic names
Yeah.
almost all the time, and it's
Alex Hamilton.
Well, that's just it. It's either is it Fred Hamilton or Alex? What is his name?
Yeah,
It's
Alex Hamilton.
Yeah, it's like okay, cool. And then like there's another character named Richard Holden.
But it's like, didn't they see Star Wars? The whole point was everyone had silly names. Like Luke Skywalker, for goodness sake. He's not like Luke Johnson. At least in Star Crash, he called her Stella Star. But there's a deliberate attempt to give people sci-fi names. Just Alex Hamilton is just so lame. Anyway, he is a live wire space captain who is permanently in conflict with his superiors. There's a great moment which again just came out of nowhere, where he walks into a room, punches an officer in the face, and then walks off.
And then the
And I'm
next
like,
scene is him.
what?
Well, I have to say that scene, it takes too long because it's this this single shot where we watch him walk across walk seemingly forever, and then punch the guy, and then walk back out of the room the same way. It's like, okay, that scene needed to be exactly
It's
half
so
that
funny.
long.
There's another great bit later on where because there seems to be this kind of your mission control
Yeah.
on Earth, and there's a bit when the guys are all on their computers, and then one guy leans over the balcony to the commanding officer down on the ground below to say, "Oh, we've got some signal." He's like, "I will come up to you now," and then he just starts walking and walking and walking, and he's got to like go along, he's got to go round up some steps. This is a thing that he's been waiting for. It's like an emergency, and like this set was built with no kind of thought towards what the plot needed.
Oh no, it seems to have been built with the idea of this will take up screen time to have the actors walking around it.
Like, I will be with you right now in 5 minutes when I walk around and up and along and round and down again. Oh dear. It's really
Yeah, I mean,
funny.
at a certain point, you're like, why don't you just drop a rope and let him climb up that? It would take
Or
less time.
why are the computers just not on the same floor? Why are they up there? It's just ridiculous. It reminds me. I don't know if you're watching this over there, but are you familiar with the character of Alan Partridge?
Well,
played
I
by
am.
Steve
I know
Coogan?
who. I know what the character is. Yes.
So he's currently got a show. It's just finished its second season called This Time, which is a sort of spoof magazine show. It's very accurate to real magazine shows. It's very good. But what they've done is that occasionally he'll have to go from one part of the studio to go to another part of the studio to talk to a guest. And they've made it so that it's just slightly too long for him to get there, and so his walk just becomes a bit uncomfortable because the camera just has to track across and follow him, and he's already said he's already read the auto cue, but he's still walking because it's a bit too far away. It's really funny. But anyway, it kind of just reminded me of that. It's like, what are they doing? Anyway, sorry. Already, I'm even in the first sentence, and
You're one sentence in, and your brain is squirming
going off.
away from this film.
So this is where we get some similarities here to plots that we've heard before in other films. There is a signal coming from somewhere in space that he's been put in charge of going to investigate, and he's annoyed about this because his people are all very tired because they've just been on a very long mission, and they don't have the training apparently, although they are all in space, so presumably what else have they been trained in?
Yeah, who knows?
But he thinks it's dangerous. They want to go and explore this signal because it's interrupting it's causing some kind of radio disruption back on Earth. And there's a really funny recurring sequence where we've got a lot of journalists from the TV, news or newspapers or whatever, demanding the truth because they've been picking up the signal from space, which apparently means they believe it means that the war, the Earth is under threat from aliens, and that's what this signal might be. And the commanding officer guy is trying to play it down, and he does a press conference, and he says, "No, it's fine. There's nothing wrong. No war in space. No." And then everybody does that classic thing that you see in movies all the time, where they all run across the room and fight with each other to get on the phones to talk to their publishers. "We're all going to die. The Earth is under attack from space. Blah 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 blah." It's very funny.
Commander, we've got a lot of questions to ask. How do you plan to answer this attack against the Earth? What are you talking about? There's been no attack against our planet. We've all seen a spaceship. Do you think MK-31 has been hit as part of some weird game? Will you please stop misrepresenting facts? A space skirmish does not mean that Earth is in peril and that we've been attacked.
That spaceship out there could have weapons.
Our bases didn't cite anything that could make us dread an attack.
Why have you already given the alert signal to all the bases?
Oh, because...
Now, we'll be quiet. That is a military secret.
Yes, sir.
The public must know about that ship. We may be facing the vanguard of a whole fleet. Damn, that's enough. Get out of here. I won't answer any more questions.
The Earth is in danger. The Earth is in desperate danger. It is very urgent that we prepare.
Aliens are attacking Earth.
Vanguard of a fleet. Our bases prepare defenses. Our bases
Can be destroyed like MK-31.
Spaceship enters our solar system.
Base Orion's monitors, we have seen the beginning of the end.
The Earth is in great danger.
spaceship approaches.
And it reminded me again. I think this film just keeps reminding me of other films. There's a very similar moment of that in Airplane, where all the newspapermen run into the phone booths, and the phone booth just falls over because they just like smack into it and it hits the ground. Anyway,
See,
so
your
yes,
brain
so
continues to squirm
yes.
away from this film.
It seems like in the future, journalists are just 1950s newspapermen. Anyway, so
Yes.
Hamilton has to go back into space to investigate this mysterious signal. Now, where have we already watched a movie about a mysterious signal in space? It does sound quite familiar.
It does.
And when they
of the something.
Yeah, when they get there, they find themselves under attack from... Now, the trouble is the print we were watching this on is quite murky, and we get to see some miniature stuff, which is not great, and it's very slow moving. Again, you get the feeling that somebody who made this movie just heard about Star Wars rather than actually watched it. Because one of the great things about Star Wars, obviously the stuff in space is very fast moving.
Yes.
And this one is more like it's how they remembered 2001. Because it's so slow. The space stuff is so slow. And there's a lot of shots of really slow moving stuff in space, and then people standing in the spaceship looking at monitors really slowly. And then we look at the monitors and we see the footage of the stuff in space that we've just been looking at, which would suggest that there are cameras placed strategically in space just to film them as they go past so they can watch them. Or they have drones hovering around outside to film themselves. It's like they just want to look at themselves in their monitors. That's kind of weird. But anyway, they're attacked by flying saucers, which is not as exciting as it sounds.
Not even
and
remotely, no.
They have to land on the planet because they have got some repairs to do. Now, luckily, what they don't have to repair is the I forgot what it was called. The thing, the meteor deflector or whatever it was called.
Well, yes, from the Planet of the Vampires, yes.
The meteor deflector appears to be fine, thank goodness, because they're still using that same technology.
Of course. It's still viable technology, even at whatever year this is.
So they land on the planet and they immediately go outside to check it out and start looking at rocks. And so this is where we get then into even more confusing stuff. about they start looking at rocks and go, "Ooh, look at the minerals in these rocks."
Yeah.
And suddenly these people are all geologists. And then one guy gets attacked by a robot, and somebody else seems to get zapped by some rocks into another place. It reminded me of Phantasm, where remember in Phantasm there's those two kind of metal rods, and if you lean into them you come out into another dimension.
Yeah, it's weird because it's as if this is some kind of portal that teleports people who walk through it, and I can't tell if it teleports them. It seems to teleport them just someplace underground.
Yeah, it teleports them about 5 meters from where they were originally standing.
Yeah, it's
because when they're trying to get out again later, they're like, "Let's just go," and you're like, "Well, hang on, didn't you just get teleported to where you are? But you're actually just over there." And it's like the most pointless bit of teleportation technology ever invented. But this is when they go, and we're back in the famous caves just outside Rome that we have seen in so many movies. I was thinking of Luigi Cozzi's Hercules films, which seem to be. I feel like it's the same caves. It might not be, but we seem to have seen a lot of Italian movies in caves.
Well, yeah, there have been quite a few, including a few Alien knockoffs that I have an undue affection for. Yeah. Yeah,
and of course in Star Crash we see possibly the same caves again. I don't know, but there's a lot of cave action here. So the spacey stuff. Although this whole podcast is about Italians in space, we've skimmed over that because basically not that much happens when they're in space. It's all here now. So they're in a cave,
and all the stuff that does happen in space is vaguely confusing boring. Anyway.
Yeah, it really is. So they are now on a planet in a cave. Somehow they've either been transported there or what. A woman has been killed and there's blood all over her face. We're not really sure exactly who's doing it. And then we find that there's a race of blue people.
Yes, these aliens.
And they commute. They're like troglodytes or something. They're like quite low intelligence, but one of them is super intelligent.
He's kind of the elder of the group.
Yeah, it's like the alpha blue man of the group.
Release them. I am Amok, strangers. My voice is pure thought that reaches the mind.
Hey, how does that guy know our language?
Shut up, Richard. It's us. Our brainwaves make the telepathy become sound.
My race was great once. The machine served men, and my people were happy. Then the huge machine stole the command from me, and we became slaves. All this before the great explosion. I am talking about an atomic catastrophe. Its survivors, as you see, have regressed to an animal state. Strangers, Amok knows why you have come to this planet.
I think we've got to do something.
We will. Captain, can you hear me? Maybe they don't know about the rest of us. We could attack them from the rear.
It'd be simple to do, sir. We can use the disintegrator guns.
Don't worry about us. Repair the generator.
And he communicates with Alex Hamilton and his fellow astronauts whose names are all meaningless or interchangeable. We've got there's a Scottish guy called Mac who sings a Scottish drinking song about being in Glasgow, which was really weird. He's on a planet in space singing about Glasgow. That was bizarre.
But Adrian, you cannot deny that took up time on screen.
It did. That's true.
Yes.
So they are talking to this guy, and he's communicating with Captain Alex, about how they are a former very advanced civilization, and they look through some monitors, or is it just that they're looking across, and we get shots of this futuristic city that used to be theirs.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if they're looking at it and it's far away, or if it's just because it's a model and it looks really small.
The forced perspective photography on this was not well done.
It's like they've visited a model village of the real city.
Yeah, this is what it looks like if we could ever go there.
It's like we used to live in this city. We've recreated it using plastic bottles and sellotape.
And Legos and whatever else we had laying about, yes.
To remind us of our former home. So apparently they built so much technology to do all their jobs for them, and then they built a supercomputer to control all the technology, so they didn't even have to bother controlling the technology that was doing all their jobs for them. So they basically lent so much into technology that they gave this computer the ultimate power, and then it decided to shoot lasers at them and make them all live in a cave.
Well, I mean, it's the age-old story, Adrian. It's give a supercomputer control over your lives, and then, of course, the supercomputer turns evil. I mean, you know.
Yeah, which, of course, chimes totally with Captain Hamilton, which I just realised he is called Fred on the IMDb, but just going off what Matt says and Matt Blake says.
But he's also referred to as Mike in some descriptions of this thing. I don't even know if they ever nailed down... I mean, no. I don't see how anybody who watched this film cold and was attempting to gather information from it, you know, like character names.
Because also the character names are not in the closing credits.
No.
The closing credits is just a list of people. There's no so-and-so played by blah, blah, blah. It's just
these
all the
people
actors
were on screen.
So, yeah, it's somebody...
Sort it out yourself, audience.
Exactly. Somebody has had to do that on the IMDb. Captain Hamilton has previously had dialogue about the overuse of technology, because they have a computer that, don't they call it something like Whiz? That has to make all their... They won't make any decisions themselves. They always have to rely on Whiz. And Whiz says, we can do this.
And this really pisses off John Richardson's character. This is why he went and punched that guy, because the computer was telling him something, and it turned out to not actually be accurate. Yeah. And he doesn't want orders from a box. Exactly.
They won't make any judgments or decisions themselves. They feed it into this giant room-sized computer, Whiz. It reminded me a little bit, again, I don't know if I'm giving them too much credit, but if you look at Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, the lead character in that is kind of suspicious of artificial intelligence and robots and technology and so on, thinks that ultimately it will just bring everybody harm. And so we've got a similar situation here, and he is completely vindicated by the fact that this giant robot, which they eventually meet, there's a robot who's killing everybody, and they somehow get summoned, and it turns out that the robot was the one summoning them by sending this signal, because...
Oh, it is? If that's true, I missed that part.
The robot was the one... He lured them to this planet on purpose. So this is again it's just like Planet of the Vampires. They were lured here on purpose to do a job, and their job is to change a couple of fuses in the robot, because apparently he couldn't train any of the blue men to do it for him. He had to lure Earthlings here, who presumably have got better opposable thumbs or something, to be able to unscrew an old light bulb and put a new one in.
Well, it's hilarious though, because he drags these Earthmen here, and then these astronauts, or whatever we're going to refer to them as, decide to help these poor besieged blue people who are under the thumb of this evil computer, and they decide to help the inhabitants to escape, you know, their robot enslavement, and of course they manage to do this and end up, of course, spoiler alert, they destroy the computer.
Yes.
Which never looks any better than, you know, a bad forced perspective stack of boxes with some flashlights.
But what's brilliant, of course, is that to be able to destroy the computer, they have to ask Whiz what to do, and Whiz basically says, "Press the red button."
One that says destruct underneath it, maybe.
The self-destruct button.
It might as well have said that.
And so there's a whole big face-off with the computer in the room when they're changing his circuits, and he's like, ha ha ha, now I am going to control the universe and kill you all.
Captain, that red button there. Shh, not so loud, it might hear us.
Hurry up, Earthlings. What's taking so long? I'm losing patience. Faster, Earthlings. You have many to replace, and I've waited too long for this. Hurry! That's it. That's the one. Put it in. With all that power, the planet Earth will be destroyed.
And they try to press the red button, and he's like zapping them with lasers, and then I think, doesn't he throw something at it or something to hit the button?
Yeah.
Because he can't press the button, but he chucks a shoe at it or something. I can't remember. And meanwhile, Yancy Sommer, her character, which is named as Mila, I don't remember what her name was, but apparently it's Mila on the IMDb. She loves Captain Alex, and she said, "I love you" at one point, which is the first indication that she loves him. But there's no chemistry between them at all.
Oh no, of course not.
But apparently they love each other. So he's able to go back to her, and they are all happy. But well, this is really funny. They, I think the planet is going to explode because of what they've done to the computer.
Yes. Yes.
But they've taken one blue man with them, and left all the other blue men behind to die.
Correct.
And they haven't even taken the super intelligent blue man with them that was psychic. It's just one of the other guys who was a bit less clever. And then, right, this bit is not in Matt Blake's description because it's not really part of the plot. All of a sudden, one of the crew, and I can't remember which one, is it Mac maybe, turns into a werewolf. He turns into some kind of a werewolf.
Well, it's if he's
and starts killing people
by the computer. It's like the computer managed to escape the planet's destruction
by turning this guy into a werewolf. And he starts trying to attack members of the crew.
Yep.
And then gets into a fight, and he's attacking. I think is it Greta? So there's another woman on the ship. I think it might be Greta, and she's in love with the blue man.
For some reason that no one can explain. Yes.
He's protecting her, but she runs out the room because Alex tells her to run out the room. And so then you've got Alex, the werewolf guy, and the blue man. And so Alex presses the open the windows for a better view button, which all spaceships have.
Of course.
And the blue man and the werewolf get sucked into space.
So the alien manages to, sacrifice his own life to destroy the evil computer that somehow managed to turn someone into a beast.
So they've basically committed genocide.
Yes.
But not even on purpose, just like as an unintended consequence of their mission. They blew up the planet, and then the one guy that may have been able to continue his race with an Earth woman in it, producing slightly less blue children.
Yes.
He's been sucked out into space, and that's the end.
Yeah.
And that whole bit is like, what the? This was another thing where you think, hang on, did you mean to put this scene on the other movie? Like, where did this werewolf guy come from? Yeah, I
gotta tell you, man, in the name of all that is bright and sparkly in this world, what in hell is going on here?
If anything, that guy is a beast in space.
Yeah.
And maybe they should have just stuck that scene into Beast in Space. Which my understanding of Beast in Space is that there's not that much of it in space.
No, it's more of a.
It's more this.
We've found a way to craft a pseudo science fiction framework around several very poorly filmed sex scenes. So yes.
Mm-hmm. But there you go. So that is War of the Planets, a film that is available freely to watch online, and I'll put the link in the notes.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty interesting, and there's 4 of them, which kind of makes me want to watch them. But
that word "interesting" that you just used, I'm not sure it means what you think it means.
Okay.
It's doing that word is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It's carrying a heavy load, and I would like to unpack it for just a second.
Okay.
Interesting. It's interesting in an arch, sarcastic way of looking at film. But intrinsically on its own, as a work of art, he said with a giant question mark in his voice, I don't know that it is. I'm not kidding you that when I went to watch this thing for the first time in a very long time, I had to super caffeinate myself and still found myself starting to doze off and having to get up and walk around the room and kind of pace in front of the television screen to keep myself from losing consciousness. It was a rough ride, man. So interesting. I've got to debate you on the word interesting as a choice here.
I mean, it took me about a week of doing about 20 minutes at a go. I didn't watch it all in one go, which might possibly have not helped because the film feels so disjointed anyway. But
it's so
I couldn't do it in one go. I couldn't do it in one go.
I do not want this show to deteriorate into the kind of show that I do not like, which is a film podcast in which you begin to wonder if the hosts actually enjoy film. And luckily, we've not had to worry about that up till now. But into each life a little rain must fall, and in this case, sometimes a really terrible movie is dropped into your lap because your co-host is a sadist. That's you, Adrian. I'm calling you out. That's what you are. I fear for I fear for the lives of your children. Yeah. This is. Don't get me wrong. Somebody somewhere must like this movie. Surely. I mean, surely somebody does. I am not that person. No, you said at the beginning of this that you think that you like it more than me, right?
Possibly.
Okay. What are the elements? And I've got a completely open mind here. I'm casting wide the doors. What are the elements of the film that you enjoyed?
Well, I don't know. I think what I like is the attempt to do a new version of the Gamma 1 thing where he's done. I think what I like more is the idea behind it, perhaps, rather than the film itself.
Yeah, I can see that.
I like the fact that he wanted to make 4 movies and have them all kind of interconnect, and they've all got the same matching red velvet helmets, or I don't know,
that are never removed.
Helmets.
Isn't that
no,
odd?
They never take them off. Yeah, and that's very hot.
That's one of those things. That's one of those things that in a movie that could possibly have held my attention longer, I mean, just even visually, is that at some point the characters would take those headpieces off, and in other words, just to change the way everyone looks for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, they even had a brief costume change in Planet of the Vampires, but no.
Right.
No,
well, remember in Planet of the Vampires they had those headpieces that they're wearing when they're in space, but once they land, several of them are removed, and it's one of those things where you get that differentiation between characters because everyone's wearing a uniform. These are uniforms, and so if everybody looks the same, if everyone's dressed the same, that just adds more to the what the hell am I watching? Who is that person? Why are they there? Kind of vibe,
No, to be fair, the film is terrible, but I think it's just the idea behind it that I like more.
And I can get behind that,
Yeah, I don't think I could pick out any elements and say these are its redeeming features because it doesn't have any. But when I listen to podcasts and people talk about films and how terrible they are, that always just piques my interest and curiosity, if nothing else. So,
and we may be doing the same to people right now.
Maybe doing the same thing. It's just
for which I fully apologize.
Yeah. So. Now, I'd like to close up with some feedback that we have received. Very exciting. We've had 2 emails, and we've had one from somebody whose name is Kurt Fukuda, and he wanted to thank us about our Planet of the Vampires episode. Oh. I'm sure he won't be thanking us for this episode.
Well, who knows? He might.
But so he says it's amazing what Barb was able to accomplish with such limited resources, and he also thanks us for following up the episode on a Franco and Ciccio movie with one on a great sci-fi film, and he said yes, its greatness comes from the genius vision of Mario Bava.
True.
Which is absolutely right. So thank you, Kurt. We had an email. So you mentioned last time that there was a song by a band called Several Mouth Parts.
Several Mouth Parts, yeah.
And so I got in touch with them. I initially got very confused and got in touch with another band that also have a similar name. Because there's a band called Mouth Parts, and they were the ones that I found on social media, and they're from Sheffield, and they also do kind of surfy, punky stuff. And so at first I thought that was them, and I emailed them, and they're like, no, we haven't got that. we haven't done a song called Wild Wild Planet, and then I realised it was the wrong band. But
Adrian.
anyway, I know. So, but anyway, so I eventually found the right band, and they said it was fine to use their song. But then their guitarist emailed us to tell us the story of how this song came to be, which I thought I would share with you all, which I thought was really interesting. So his name is Spooks Mahoney, and so he says about 10 years ago he watched Wild Wild Planet on TCM. Actually, I'm just going to read it out because otherwise I'm trying to put it in the third person and I'm just going to get confused. So 10 years ago I stayed up late to watch Wild Wild Planet on TCM. Though tired, I found the film so insane and fascinating I had to see it to the end. The line, "Watch out for those gadgets on their chests," was it though. I realised I had to write a theme song for the film. I immediately heard it in my mind as a quasi-60s surf number, a bit like the Byrds' title song for Don't Make Waves. As I was falling asleep, the basic melody came to me, and the next day I figured out the tune on my 1936 National Dobro prototype electric tenor guitar, which he's also sent me a photo of, and it's very cool. In my song, I envisioned the wild planet to be sort of a swinging 60s sexual paradise, as if Hugh Hefner were Ming to a kinky Planet Mongo. That's a film I'd watch.
Yeah.
That is why, of course, should one go there, it would not be wise to admit it to a world where the women are mild. I wrote the lyrics in about 20 minutes. We recorded it a week later. The basic song was done in one take. That's pretty amazing. We broke for lunch. We broke for lunch and added the vocals and special effects. This is one of a handful of songs that turned out exactly as I heard it when writing it. Mary Fleener, the cartoonist, was our bass player at the time. She also did the sci-fi sounds and Star Trek vocal backgrounds. I played the electric tenor and did the vocals. Steve Kane played lead and second rhythm guitar, and Chuck Leslie, who died about a year ago, was our drummer. He goes on, I used to read Ackerman's Famous Monsters and Screen Thrills in the early 60s, and he reinforced my idea that the B in B movie stands for best. I have said for 40 years that there is more truth in 10 minutes of Robot Monster than in all the works of Spielberg. As a matter of fact, our song Dead Vegans is a mashup of the Tucker film, Plan 9 and Night of the Living Dead. And I make a reference to Night of the Demon in Love's Everlasting Curse. And the song Jinx Money is simply about my favourite Bowery Boys film.
Wow.
So there you go. And he also closes with quite an interesting challenge to our listeners. Should you have an idea or title for something to be turned into a song, I accept all challenges.
Nice.
So there you go. So you can tweet us if you have an idea for perhaps another movie that they should tackle. But I thought that was really interesting. So thank you, Spooks, for sending that to us. I'm going to ask him if it's okay to share the photos that he sent me as well. I'll put them on Twitter if he says that's okay, because that's really cool. But so thanks, Rod. I was unfamiliar with the band. If you haven't heard our previous episode, why are you listening to this one? Is my first question. But do go back and hear their song at the end, and check out the links to their website in the notes, because they're really cool. So yeah,
well
that's
done,
quite fun.
Adrian, yes.
Yeah, it's really fun. And who knows what other Italian movies have inspired surf punk songs. We'll hopefully find a few. In fact, the other band, Mouth Parts, that I am contacted by mistake, they have done a song about a killer sex robot. So there might be room for that in a future episode anyway.
Yes, that sounds. I got to hear it at the very least. Yeah.
Yeah. So well, there's probably room for that band as well at some point. Okay, but anyway.
Well, listen. One last bit of bizarre movie trivia about this movie before we say goodbye to it forever. He said, hopefully. The guy who is credited with writing the screenplay for this.
Oh, there's a screenplay?
Yeah, I said credited with. I never claimed something existed. I'm saying he got a credit. His name is Aldo Crudo, and he worked with Alfonso Brescia, or Al Bradley, as he's known on the English language prints, on a number of different films, including this film and then War of the Robots, which just lends more of my. I like your idea that these were probably shot together and then they just randomly mixed together sequences. But he also has a screenplay credit on Beast in Space, so we'll see how that turns out. Perhaps it's just leftover ideas. But I looked at other films that he's written, and I've got to tell you, he did a film. He wrote a film called The Return of the Exorcist, which has Richard Conte as an exorcist. And I have to say, I must see this movie, no matter how bad it may be.
Is that the one also known as Naked Exorcism?
Naked Exorcism?
Yeah.
That is a good question. I don't know.
I believe
about,
so.
Yes, it is.
The Cauldron Films are putting that out on Blu-ray later in the year, I believe.
The screenwriter of this terrible science fiction movie was involved in writing that movie.
There you go.
And also one other that really does look like it has a chance of being an interesting movie is called Lady Dynamite.
Yeah.
It's as far as I can tell, it's basically about a New Jersey mafia boss, and
Nice.
Might be a bit of a revenge tale. It's kind of hard to suss that out.
Yeah. Well, we can add it to the list
Of things to eventually watch. Yeah.
things to put on eventually. But yeah, he also wrote Hitchhike, which I just watched quite recently with Franco Nero in it, and that is an incredible film.
That is a really good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sort of partly a rip-off one, or inspired by Last House on the Left, and even to the point of casting David Hess in a quite similar role. But it's mainly Franco Nero and Corinne Cleary bickering, and she's fabulous in everything. And
Yeah, that's a good film. Hitchhike is good. He also did it that same year. He wrote another crime film. Came out that same year with George Eastman and Jack Palance. That was directed by our friend Alfresia here. That looks like it could be quite good as well, known as Blood and Bullets.
Yeah, so it seems like Alfonso Brescia possibly did make some good films, but then he made these. So we'll see. We'll definitely come back to him, I think, in our Poliziotteschi season, which is coming up soon. We'll try and fit in at least one of his, to partly just for comparison purposes. To see
I think it'd be a good idea. Yeah, I think you're right. We should.
If he managed to pull anything good out of his bag of tricks. Anyway, right, we'd better finish up there. So thank you, everybody. The actual discussion of the movie itself, I don't know what you're going to have made of that. We didn't go. I don't know. We couldn't go into too much more detail on the plot because there isn't really one.
Yeah.
To talk about. But Rod, thank you for helping us to navigate our way through this one. And we will ignore the other three, but we are going to come back at the end of the season to talk about Beast in Space. So
we're warning you now.
Give us a chance to kind of wrap things up there on the Brescia sci-fi movies. But thank you once again. I do appreciate your time doing these things.
Oh, glad to do it.
And thank you everybody for listening. Next episode is going to be a good film. I promise.
Quote unquote.
Yeah, depending on your definition of good.
Correct.
All right. Thanks everybody. We'll see you soon. Well, we won't see you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.